I broke myself to rebuild myself. I broke myself to rebuild myself because there came a point in my life where holding on to who I was became more painful than letting it all fall apart. There came a point where the identity I had been protecting, defending, and clinging to was no longer the identity that could carry me forward. I realized that I had been living inside a version of myself built from fear, built from insecurity, built from hesitation, built from the expectations of others. And that version of me was not strong enough for the life I wanted. That version of me was not capable of reaching the heights I dreamed of. That version of me could survive, yes, but it could never thrive. So I made a decision that felt like tearing my own world apart. I chose to break myself. Breaking myself was not destruction for the sake of destruction. It was liberation. It was a painful, intentional tearing down of everything within me that kept me small. It was admitting that my old habits were killing my future. It was admitting that my routines were built for comfort, not growth. It was admitting that my dreams required a version of me I had not yet become. Breaking myself meant dropping the illusions that I was already doing enough. It meant facing the truth about my weaknesses without looking away. It meant telling myself that if I truly wanted a different life, I had to become a different person. That realization was both terrifying and empowering because it meant the power was in my hands. My transformation wasn't waiting for someone else to approve it. It wasn't waiting for the right moment. It wasn't waiting for luck or fate. It was waiting for me. When I finally broke myself, the first thing I felt was fear. Not the kind of fear that makes you want to run, but the kind of fear that comes when you realize there is no turning back. Because once you shatter the identity you have lived with for years, you cannot put it back together the same way. The pieces never fit the way they used to. And that's the point. You are not supposed to return to who you were. You are supposed to evolve. You are supposed to rise. You are supposed to build something stronger from the fragments. And so I stood there, surrounded by the broken pieces of my old self, and I chose to begin again. Rebuilding myself was harder than the breaking. Anyone can destroy, but not everyone knows how to rebuild. Rebuilding required patience, it required discipline, it required honesty, it required courage, it required showing up every single day, even when I was tired, confused, or overwhelmed. Rebuilding meant taking responsibility for my life without blaming the world, circumstances, or past wounds. It meant refusing to allow excuses to dictate my future. It meant understanding that the new me would not emerge instantly. It would emerge through consistency, through commitment, through deliberate effort, brick by brick, habit by habit, choice by choice. There were days where rebuilding felt impossible, days where the weight of my broken pieces made it hard to move, days where I questioned whether I had made a mistake by breaking myself in the first place. But in those moments, I reminded myself that the old me was not an option anymore. I had outgrown that version of myself. I had outgrown the dreams that once felt safe, but now felt suffocating. I had outgrown the limits I used to accept. I had outgrown the excuses I used to hide behind. And once you outgrow something, you cannot shrink yourself to fit back into it. The only direction left is forward. During the rebuilding process, I learned that growth is not a clean journey. It is messy. It is confusing. It is full of setbacks, doubts, and breakdowns. There were mornings where I woke up with no idea how to become the person I wanted to be. There were nights where frustration consumed me because progress felt invisible. But I kept going, not because I felt strong, but because I refused to give up on myself again. Every small step I took became a small victory. Every habit I built became a new pillar. Every challenge I faced became another lesson. And slowly, the foundation of the new me began to take shape. Rebuilding myself required me to step into the version of me that existed only in my imagination. The stronger me, the disciplined me, the focused me, the unstoppable me. I had to act like that version before I became that version. I had to train my mind to stop seeking comfort. I had to train my emotions to stop reacting impulsively. I had to train my body to follow through, even when motivation disappeared. The rebuilding process was not about creating a new identity out of thin air. It was about uncovering the identity that had always been buried beneath fear, doubt, and excuses. I wasn't creating a new me. I was revealing the real me. I broke myself to rebuild myself because staying the same was killing my potential. I broke myself because the life I wanted required a level of strength I had never practiced. I broke myself because I refused to die with my dreams still inside me. And as I rebuilt, I realized something profound. Breaking was not the end, it was the beginning. The moment when everything fell apart was the moment my true life started. The breaking was the awakening. The rebuilding was the transformation. And the new me, the stronger, wiser, disciplined me, was worth every tear, every fear, every struggle, every moment of rebuilding from nothing. I broke myself to rebuild myself because staying the same was more painful than tearing myself apart. There comes a moment in every life where you realize that the version of you that once protected you, once helped you survive, once carried you through storms, can no longer take you any further. And that realization hurts. It hurts because we become attached to our old selves, even the broken parts, even the parts built from trauma, fear, and insecurity. But rebuilding begins with honesty. It begins with the moment you admit that you have outgrown who you used to be. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I finally understood that growth demands sacrifice. It demands uncomfortable decisions. It demands walking away from habits that feel good but kill potential, from people who comfort your weakness but fear your strength, from environments that keep you predictable and small. Breaking yourself is not destruction for the sake of destruction. It is demolition with intention. It is tearing down the walls of limitation so you can build foundations that can hold the weight of the future you want to carry. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the life I wanted did not fit inside the life I was living. You cannot fit greatness into a mindset designed for survival. You cannot fit confidence into a mind filled with doubt. You cannot fit discipline into a lifestyle built around excuses. Something had to break, and that something was the illusion that I could transform without discomfort. The illusion that I could rise without falling. The illusion that I could strengthen without struggling. Rebuilding begins when illusions end. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the pain of change was less terrifying than the regret of staying still. Every day I looked at myself and knew I had more inside me, knew I was capable of more, knew I was meant for more. But knowing is nothing without action, and action requires courage. So I gathered every piece of fear, every whisper of doubt, every insecurity that tried to chain me down, and I shattered them one by one. Not because I felt strong, but because I was tired of feeling weak. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I learned that failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the blueprint. Every broken piece of me carried a lesson. Every scar carried wisdom. Every setback carried direction. Rebuilding is not about pretending you were never broken. It's about using the broken pieces to create something more powerful, more focused, more aligned, more unstoppable. It's about building a version of yourself who can hold the weight of destiny without collapsing. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I realized the world does not give you the life you deserve. It gives you the life you demand. And you cannot demand greatness with a defeated spirit. You cannot demand respect with a shattered sense of worth. You cannot demand opportunity when you refuse to let go of limitations. So I destroyed the parts of me that apologized for wanting more. I destroyed the parts of me that tolerated mediocrity. I destroyed the parts of me that stayed silent when life asked whether I was ready to choose myself. I broke myself to rebuild myself because healing is not passive, it is work. It is the work of confronting your flaws without running, the work of acknowledging your mistakes without collapsing, the work of seeing your darkness without letting it define you. Rebuilding requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. You learn to sit with yourself, really sit with yourself, without distraction, without avoidance, without pretending. And in that silence, you hear the truth. Not the truth you wish for, but the truth you need, the truth that demands change. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the future version of me was calling, and I refused to send them away unanswered. That future version, stronger, wiser, sharper, more disciplined, more focused, kept whispering, "I am waiting for you." And I realized the only way to reach that version was to shed everything that was not aligned with who I was becoming. So I cut away the laziness, the excuses, the self-doubt, the complacency, the fear of judgment, the fear of failure, not gently but ruthlessly, because rebuilding requires ruthless self-respect. I broke myself to rebuild myself because transformation demands discomfort. The caterpillar dissolves inside the cocoon before it becomes a butterfly. The seed must be buried in darkness before it grows toward light. The diamond must endure pressure before it shines. When you are breaking, you are not ending, you are beginning. You are dissolving the outdated version of you so the evolved version can emerge. You are stepping into the fire not to burn, but to forge. I broke myself to rebuild myself because staying the same would have been a slow death. Not physical death, spiritual death. The death of potential, the death of dreams, the death of possibilities. And I refused to let my story end in stagnation. I chose evolution. I chose growth. I chose a path that required sacrifice, discipline, resilience, and grit. I chose to rebuild myself brick by brick, habit by habit, belief by belief, morning by morning, decision by decision. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I finally understood that life rewards the brave. Life rewards those willing to confront their own shadows. Life rewards those who choose change over comfort. Life rewards those who refuse to settle. So I let my old self shatter, and in that breaking I found clarity. In that breaking I found direction. In that breaking I found strength I didn't know existed. The strength to rebuild. I broke myself to rebuild myself because every time I tried to grow without letting go of who I used to be, life pushed back harder. It was as if the universe kept reminding me that elevation requires separation, that I couldn't climb while holding the weight of my old identity. I realized I had been trying to build a future using the tools of my past, and those tools were blunt, rusted, and incapable of shaping the life I envisioned. So I made the difficult choice. I set them down. I stepped into a new chapter with nothing but willingness, and that willingness became the foundation of my rebirth. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the person I had become was built by circumstances, by pain, by survival instincts, by moments where I reacted instead of chose. That version of me wasn't crafted with intention. It was shaped by everything that happened to me. But the version I wanted to be, the stronger, wiser, more disciplined version, required intention. It required decisions, not reactions. It required self-awareness, not self-neglect. So I dismantled the version formed by the world and began constructing the version formed by my own hands. I broke myself to rebuild myself because healing demanded that I stop running. For so long I ran from myself, ran from the things that hurt, the memories that cut deep, the insecurities that whispered lies, the fears that settled in my bones. But running kept me trapped. It kept me tired, lost, and disconnected. So I stopped. I turned around and faced everything I had avoided. And that moment of confrontation was the breaking point. Not a breaking of weakness, but a breaking of chains. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I finally understood that nothing changes until you change. Not your environment, not your opportunities, not your relationships, not your path. You must change first. You must become the person capable of receiving what you desire. Wanting is not enough. Planning is not enough. Hoping is not enough. You must evolve into someone who can handle the blessings you pray for. So I tore down the architecture of my old patterns and rebuilt them into structures that could support my ambition. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I wanted a life that aligned with my potential, not my past. And potential is expensive. It demands payment in discipline, in sacrifice, in self-control, in uncomfortable growth. It demands that you stop lying to yourself about who you are and who you could be. So I paid the price. I let go of habits that wasted my time. I cut off relationships that drained my energy. I silenced the inner voice that told me to settle. Breaking myself was not destruction, it was investment. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the truth is transformation isn't gentle. It's fierce, it's messy, it's loud, it's painful. It's a process that asks you to stretch beyond what feels possible. There were days I questioned everything. Days I wanted to quit, days I felt lost. But even in that confusion, I kept moving because I finally understood that breaking is not the end. It is the beginning of becoming. I broke myself to rebuild myself because growth required letting go of comfort. Comfort is a slow killer. It whispers sweet lies. It tells you that where you are is good enough, even when your heart knows you were made for more. So I walked away from the comfort that imprisoned me. I walked into discipline, structure, challenges, uncertainty. And in those uncomfortable spaces, I found the fragments of the person I wanted to be. I broke myself to rebuild myself because authenticity demanded it. I was tired of pretending, tired of acting strong while hiding wounds, tired of dreaming big but living small, tired of knowing better but doing less. Breaking myself meant confronting my hypocrisy and choosing alignment over illusion. It meant rebuilding a life where my actions matched my ambitions, where my habits matched my goals, where my identity matched my purpose. I broke myself to rebuild myself because the courage to rebuild is the greatest proof of self-love. Anyone can stay broken. Anyone can remain in pieces. But rebuilding requires belief. Belief that you deserve better. Belief that you're capable of more. Belief that you can transform your life regardless of where you started. That belief became my blueprint. It became the reason I kept going even when it hurt, even when it was lonely, even when the world didn't understand. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I wanted to rewrite my story. I didn't want to be defined by my mistakes, my failures, my insecurities, or my past. I wanted to be defined by my resilience, by my courage, by my transformation. And the power to rewrite your story comes from the willingness to break the chapters that no longer serve you. So I tore pages out. I rewrote sentences. I changed endings. I became the author again, not just a character drifting through circumstance. I broke myself to rebuild myself because every powerful version of me was waiting on the other side of discomfort. I knew that if I stayed the same, life would remain the same. Nothing new grows in the soil of old habits. Nothing great emerges from the comfort zone. So I embraced the discomfort, welcomed the uncertainty, and stepped into the unknown with a determination that refused to let me go back. I broke myself to rebuild myself because I realized that the best version of me was not going to arrive by accident. It had to be built intentionally, patiently, and relentlessly. And every day I rebuild. Every day I choose growth over excuses. Every day I choose discipline over distraction. Every day I choose the future over the past. I am not finished. I am becoming.